Thank you, Andrew. Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today for the third session in this webinar series on social programs within an ESG framework. My name is Lars Winkelbauer, and I'm the Executive Vice President and COO at Polar Air Cargo, and I'm also a member of Airlink's Board of Trustees. And I have the absolute pleasure today, as Andrew said, of chairing this session. I'm really glad to see so many people from our first and also second session returning for this installment. And to all of those joining us for the first time, first of all, welcome, and hope you find this session interesting. And you certainly will be able to view past sessions, as Andrew said, very, very soon as well. We very much want people to participate in this or in these sessions to share their own experiences and insights. And so there will be really a lot of opportunity to pose questions to the speakers. And certainly, again, we encourage you to share your own experiences and insights and provide an opportunity for everybody to learn from each other's experiences. Just a very quick recap for those that may not be in the know. What is the Butterfly Project? And the aim of the Butterfly Project is really threefold. One, to provide an opportunity for Airlink to give back to the aviation sector in a meaningful way by helping highlight the positives within the sector as it relates to critical humanitarian and social issues. Secondly, it aims to provide a mechanism for all of our volunteers to get involved with an aspect of Airlink's work as a thought leader in a meaningful way. And finally, it is a means to draw on the really immense expertise of Airlink supporters and patrons to try and push the envelope in seeking solutions to issues that impact our sector and certainly society at large. Why is ESG worth examining? Well, as our survey results last week showed us, ESG is a proxy for many things. And sometimes we, as leaders of businesses and our businesses themselves, will increasingly judge by. As my colleague Robin mentioned in the last session, investors held approximately 11.6 trillion in assets chosen according to ESG criteria at the beginning of 2018. And that is up about approximately 8.1 trillion just 2 years earlier. And as we have learned across the past two sessions, increasingly stakeholders, and by that I mean, for example, employees, investors, customers, and even the general public are ranking the value of our businesses and whether they wish to be associated by an ESG criteria. So why are we examining here the social component of ESG? In fact, the S of ESG. Social criteria examine how a business manages relationships with employees, suppliers, and customers, and obviously also with communities where or within it operates. It includes everything from LGBTQ plus equality, racial diversity from the executive suite down, and inclusion programs and hiring practices. It even looks at how a company advocates for social good in a wider world beyond its natural limits or sphere of business. I've no doubt that most of you had discussions within your own organization as to your company's involvement or environmental credentials and policies. But the social aspect is the most, should I call it, opaque and least defined part of the equation. And that allows us, or that allows for opportunities, but also for pitfalls. We therefore felt that colleagues across the aviation sector could really benefit from knowing more about what other businesses are doing in order to keep or to help formulate and or improve their own social programs. And I'm really very grateful to our speakers today for being willing to share their experiences and insights in today's session. In alphabetical order, we have David Ashley, who's the operations manager for Flexport.com. David has been with Flexport for 5 years, during which time he has held a variety of key roles. As operations manager, he is across all aspects of international trade, from origin to destination for Flexport's small and medium-sized businesses and mid-market accounts. He is Flexport interface with global logistic partners across 5 continents, coordinating international shipments. He also advises clients on their overall supply chain strategies, providing best practices and solutions. Up next, we have Suzi Cabo, who is the Managing Director of Social Impact Optimization for United Airlines. In this role, she leads strategy and cultivates relationships between United and their nonprofit community to offer solutions for the company's most complex business challenges and address critical social issues impacting United's hub markets. Before joining the Communities Affairs team in 2011, Suzi held several roles with the United marketing team, where she managed search engine optimization, sports and entertainment sponsorships, and social media. And prior to working at United, Suzi spent 8 years developing the brand narrative for some of the world's leading brands, including Dell, Kohler, and Macy. And David Walton. David Walton is a Deputy Managing Director and Chief Operating Officer of BOC Aviation. David joined BOC Aviation in November of 2014 as Chief Operating Officer. He currently oversees the legal and transaction management, compliance and insurance, pricing and portfolio management, technical procurement, and information technology departments. David has more than 30 years of experience in the aircraft leasing and financing industry. Prior to joining the company, he served as general counsel for both privately held and publicly listed companies, with primary responsibility for structuring and documenting capital raising, joint ventures, and leasing activities. So now I would like to invite David Ashley to speak first and share some of his thoughts with the audience. David, you have the floor.
Thanks, Lars. Hi, everyone. My name is David Ashley. I'm the head of operations for Flexport.org. I'm going to give you a quick overview of our social impact programs and then discuss a bit about the motivation and approach behind our initiatives. So to start, Flexport.org is the social impact arm of Flexport, a global and digital freight forwarder and custom broker. Our mission, as you see here, is to use logistics as a positive force for social and environmental impact. Next slide, please. Leveraging our operational capabilities and technology, we empower our clients and partners to do good and really drive impact at scale. We provide a wide range of programs, including discounted shipping, disaster relief support, product donations matchmaking, and carbon neutral shipping. Next slide, please. So I want to briefly talk a bit about our motivation and why we developed these specific programs. So first, we really wanted to address real needs that we saw in the community. So more and more people are in need of humanitarian assistance. And we know that nonprofit organizations spend majority of their budget on supply chain related activities. So we felt there was a real opportunity for us to get involved and help reduce logistic costs for nonprofits in order to help them maximize their impact. Second, by being and working in the logistics industry, we felt we had a really strong responsibility to get involved in aid logistics. We wanted to take advantage of our existing capabilities, expertise, and programs to do good and drive impact. And finally, just our fit. We're not trying to do something new or programs that are totally different from our work, but we want to kind of build on existing products and services, things that fit our mold and we're already really good at. And last slide, please. And finally, just want to share some thoughts on kind of our approach, how we've implemented successfully some of these programs and the lessons we've learned. So first and foremost, Flexport.org, our social impact programs are central to our identity as a company. We're really embedded throughout everything Flexport does overall, and it's really a key part of our values, our external brand, and our internal culture. Next, we try to look at all stakeholders and empower all of them to do good. So, maybe our main work you might think is working just with nonprofits, but we try to also really support our commercial partners, our commercial clients, whether it's giving donations for aid shipments or taking their excess inventory and matching it with the nonprofit in need. And we also focus on engaging with our employees, giving them opportunities to give back to their communities, whether through volunteering, donating to a Flexport.org fund, or getting involved in our larger programs. And finally, probably one of the best lessons we've learned in the last 5+ years is just to really move beyond ourselves and just our own company and build and implement partnerships across our network. We think we're working on pretty difficult and complex problems in disaster relief and aid shipping. So it's important for us to work with others. We think that our impact can be a lot greater if we turn to our network and communities to really drive social sustainability and progress. For example, we've been responding pretty heavily to the COVID-19 pandemic since the beginning of last year. And we've worked really closely with Airlink and United and Atlas and other airlines and ocean carriers to really build off our expertise, work together to provide the best and optimal solution to the people on the ground who really need that critical aid as soon as possible. Thanks so much, Lars.
Thank you very much, David. Very interesting. And certainly, the partnership aspect is probably something we all can, get behind. It's certainly a way to further amplify, the overall goal here. Very, very good. Thank you so much for that, David. Up next, Suzi Cabo. The floor is yours.
So thank you all for giving me some opportunity and time here to talk about some of United's social programs. And my gosh, just like all of you, 15 minutes or so is not enough to talk about all of them. Want to talk through, similar to David, kind of our setup and the why behind what we're doing. But I want to get into some of the real specifics of where we are with our ESG strategy, where we are with pulling together the teams at United. What is the framework? What are the challenges that we are seeing? I'll be very transparent in saying we don't have it figured out. So I'm not going to offer you all of the solutions that you're looking for, but I think in the spirit of collaboration and partnership, we'll get a better understanding of where we all are and how we can support each other through this journey, because I think there are very few that really have it figured out, to be honest, at this point. So, similar to what David was talking about and all of the wonderful work that Flexport is doing. And I will have to say thank you, Flexport, for all the work that you have, the collaboration that you have had with us and all of our humanitarian response and many other initiatives. Thank you for being a fabulous partner, as well as Airlink. United, like many other brands, have been really successful in executing against a lot of elements in ESG. And I'm going to get into a little bit of what is the E, the S, the G, and kind of where does it all fit together. But, we also look at our business, what we are as an airline, what we are as a global carrier, to really figure out how we connect our business to the needs of the community. And I use that very loosely. Community in the hubs that we operate, community being our customers, community being our supply chain and businesses. Like, what can we do to improve kind of all of those communities, and what our business, our people, our planes can do, and how we can put them to work for the greater good. And it really revolves around these 4 cornerstone areas. So flying towards a more sustainable future is our commitment to the environment. You may have heard that United has committed to fly 100% green by the year 2050, and that really all is incorporated into that sustainable future cornerstone here. Squarely falls within the E element of the ESG. So we are covered there, and kind of a lot of those requirements and reporting and criteria will be captured in that specific. But like Lars said, the S is really loosely defined at this point, and there's a lot of different elements that fit into the S of it. And I think these next three bullets, fall within that S category. And we'll talk a little bit more later on of how we're trying to figure out how to bring that story to life in a meaningful way for investors and other stakeholders. But breaking down barriers to promote inclusion, that is really all about making sure that our employee kind of composition is really matching what the population looks like through all levels of our leadership and all the way up to the board. It is making sure that we are meeting the needs of a very diverse customer base and what that means from customer service and standards. It is making sure that the way we engage our supply chain and inviting the vendors and suppliers into the RFP process is fair, is equitable, and we are making sure that we're breaking down those barriers so that all businesses can compete to be a supplier for United. Inspiring next generation of leaders is really, from one perspective, a little self-serving. We recognize that we need to build a pipeline of future professionals in aviation, whether that's our pilots, our technical operations, some of those specialized workforces, and also, from our management and administration, and really making sure that we do that in a responsible way that does also show the diversity of the populations which we serve and the diversity of the population at large. And finally, communities in crisis, and I'm leaving that one last because I'm going to dive into that one a bit because I think it's particularly relevant for this audience, and you will all understand, especially because the work that we do in this space. This is all about putting our planes to use for the greater good. It's exactly what Airlink is doing with all of your partners. It's trying to connect supplies and people, cargo, and all of those things to communities in crisis. And I'm going to talk about that just a little bit to showcase one of our programs in action. And Airlink, you will know these numbers. These numbers are written by you. You actually helped us pull all of this together. So just through Airlink, and I'm talking specifically about our response to COVID-19. This is just in 2020, these numbers. Our program was robust. And many of you online have probably been a beneficiary of some of the donated space that United has provided. But you'll see on here, and I won't read through them, but it's everything from, being able to deliver supplies and first responders. We responded to 21 disasters just in that one year in 2020. And that wasn't just for COVID, but it was during a year that the airline industry was crippled. We were struggling to survive and still made it a very large priority for us to use our aircraft and our people for the greater good. As you look at the larger response, and I definitely will not go through this, but these are numbers specific to our response for COVID. And this data is up to date. You'll see on the bottom through through June of this year. Our responses are wide. Everything from cargo to providing flights to medical professionals, getting our Mileage Plus members engaged to donate their miles so that they can go out to work for the greater good. All sorts of donations as it comes from food donated from our Polaris lounges, our United clubs. We actually turned our Houston hangar into a satellite office of the Houston Food Bank during the pandemic, and our employees processed about 2.2 million pounds of food through that facility because the local food bank just didn't have the capacity and the space to meet the demand. So we opened up our facility to do the same. So we get really creative in using all the assets that we have in responding to these social programs. And we're extremely proud of it. You'd look at this, you'd be proud of it too if you fly United, and I hope you do. I hope it makes you really happy and proud of the work that we are doing. But as we look at this, we figure out, this is a great, social story, but does anyone care about it? Is it material? Is this what, is important to the broader ESG story? And it's a question that we talk about and struggle with quite a bit. And this is just one example of the many programs we have. So I'm going to flip over and just start talking about, some of the challenges that we are facing and trying to translate what is an impactful, powerful program into the terms that are really critical for ESG reporting. So a couple of our challenges, and Lars, you talked about this at the beginning, like what is the S? Depending on where you look, you'll get different definitions, and that could be a good thing and that could be a really challenging thing. I think it's interesting that in most cases and definitions, the most specific that we'll get in this type of work that we're talking about in the social space is local communities, and that's kind of how it's defined. What does that mean? We understand what health and safety, diversity, human rights, supply chain, all of those make sense. But when you get this term local community, what does that mean, specifically from the next bullet from a materiality perspective? What is it that investors and other stakeholders are looking to see in the S space? And it's a challenge for us to now start to understand what is deemed material, because there's strong definitions there. The other thing that we talked about, and it's been touched on, is that investors are really driving demand for the ESG disclosure. What about all those other stakeholders? We talk about the employees, the customers. Lars mentioned all of these things. Corporate clients, government partners, our community partners. Are they interested in the exact same information in the way that some of the ESG frameworks are disclosing the information, or do we have to think about it in a different way? Which brings me to my last point of how should ESG and CSR, you're all probably like, what's that acronym? I've never seen it. And I didn't mean to make up a new one. I meant to put CSR. Can they, how will they, or should they coexist? There's a bigger story to be told, I believe, outside of what are some of the standards in ESG disclosure right now. So these are some of the questions that we're struggling with and trying to answer as we develop out our approach. And this one I think is one of the greatest slides that someone in our team pulled together. It helps really bring to life some of the challenges. Here it is. This is the ESG ecosystem, and it's super crowded and confusing. And you can see, and I won't go through all this, but all sorts of different indices and frameworks, some that are requesting information, some that are pulling information, some that are just providing standards. Where does one start, and what stakeholders are looking at which indice or which framework, and I also think this is such a hot topic now, which will rise to the top over time, and where do we invest and kind of hedge our bets now to only find out, will that particular framework indice last over time, or is that just kind of, the flavor of the day? So I think there's a lot to be said here. And then is United is a US-based company. We look a lot to what the SEC kind of is looking at and what is trending in this space, and look at really what is required from a disclosure, perspective, and what is, voluntary. So I think the SEC over time will be critical in helping us understand what is going to be required. Interesting that in the last month, in June, that the SEC passed a legislation to require public companies to disclose. And the bill came right on the heels of the SEC putting out an opening for public comments, which are some indicators that standardization for disclosure is going to be coming soon. I mean, if we really look at this kind of logo soup, where we're really seeing the SEC at least narrow in terms of requirements, is really around the SASB, Sustainable Accounting Standards Board, as well as the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. Those two have been rising to the top in terms of what you'll see in ESG reports and companies using those two frameworks to disclose. So United is starting there. That's kind of where we're starting in terms of a framework. But what I think is really interesting, and I'm going to dive into a minute, SASB, and I'm not sure if everyone here has done this. I'd assume that some of you have. SASB puts out about 70, 75, I can't remember the exact number, of industry-specific metrics for their framework for reporting on ESG. So I pulled up the airline industry specifics around this topic, and it's an eye chart. Don't look through all of them, but you'll see this is what SASB is deeming material for investors who are looking in aviation. And you'll see everything from the greenhouse gas emissions, labor, competitive behavior, all the way down to some activity metrics. But interestingly enough, the bar that I highlighted in orange, the labor practices, seems to be the only thing in the S space that is material as it relates to SASB accounting standards. So again, you look at all of the incredible things that we are all doing in terms of what we believe are our social programs, and where does it fit in the big picture of things? So this was really interesting to me to see and understand why for our industry labor practices rises to the top, but where does the incredible programs like I had laid out before of bringing necessary vaccines, PPE, relief support, not just at times of COVID, but in times of ongoing disaster around the globe as one example of our program, where does that fit into the greater conversation? So we don't have it figured out, and I'll kind of end the slideshow and kind of get back on my screen here, but we don't have it figured out completely just yet, especially as it relates to the S. And that's really what I wanted to focus on for the topic of this conversation. But recognize that, within United, we definitely are pulling together a task force, and it's probably similar to some of your organizations, led by our investor relations team. Our environmental team is huge, and you'll see so many of the ESG standards revolve around that environmental arm. So our environmental team is critically involved in it. Our corporate secretary, this is something that reports all the way up to our board of directors, and trying to also figure out who owns and is responsible for really collaborating the data, for making sure that it gets reported out in the way that it needs to, based on the standards that we choose or the standards that the SEC tells us that we're required to disclose in the future. And also really trying to figure out, as I'd mentioned before, where does the rest of the story fit in? Is ESG the end all be all? Is there still life for that report? And what is the materiality, of the items that we include within the CSR report? So I think just in closing here, we have a strong story to tell in the S category. It really is now just trying to find the right frameworks, the right methods, and the right audiences to make sure that those stories are being told in a way that is material to them. And I think at this point, it's just critical to realize it's not solely about the investor community, and ESG is going in that direction. So I just think there's a world outside of ESG that we all need to put our heads together and figure out how we tell that collective story. But that's a little bit of where we are, and very happy to answer questions or take comments on that if anyone has anything that I could help with.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you so much, Suzi. Obviously, some very important questions, and certainly questions that I think a lot of us have asked ourselves as well. Sometimes, we do things and, you feel, well, you don't really, is it meaningful? Does somebody actually, as you said, does somebody really care? And it will be very interesting to have that conversation later on in the question and answer session. So, thank you very much for that. Looking forward to that discussion. And last but not least, David Walton. So David, you have the floor. Would be very interested to hear from you as well.
Thanks very much. And thanks again for inviting me to this very interesting discussion. Lizzie, maybe on to the agenda slide. What I'd like to talk about today really are four things. One is relating to our social programs. Our approach is based on an idea of an engagement with our stakeholders, our employees, our investors, our partners in our social programs, and we try to be good listeners, and we try to do a lot of work to understand sort of what's important to them, And that's kind of one of the key elements of our programs. Second thing is, what we're trying to do is really have a combination of long-term relationships, as well as being nimble in our approach, and not losing sight of the fact that things are changing in the world, and we all learned that quite a bit over the last 18 months. But we want to do long-term, social programs and build on partnerships that matter to us as a company, but also be open to, bringing on new programs as things change. The third thing is, for our company, we want to take a very global approach. For those of you who aren't familiar with BOC Aviation, we are a top 5 global aircraft operating leasing company. We've been around for 27 years. We have our headquarters in Singapore, and we're the #1 Asia-based operating lease company in the world. But we have 5 offices, in 3 different continents, and our employee base is relatively small. If you think about it in terms of the size of our company, we have a balance sheet of 25 billion or thereabouts, and we have fewer than 200 employees. So our approach has to be a global one, and we do want to bear in mind that our customers are all over the world. Our investors and our employees are spread across the globe, and we need to adapt our social programs to take that into account. And so our community is really, we sort of think of it as a global community, but with individual communities where our offices are located. And then the fourth thing, if there's time, is just sort of how we changed our approach during the pandemic. And so Lizzie, maybe flick on to slide 5 if you don't mind. I'll go past that one, our little scorecard. So I said engagement is one of the key aspects. So we do town hall meetings, we do surveys. We're sort of hooked on SurveyMonkey, and what we try to do is just make this sort of a grassroots effort. So we want to know what's important to our employees. That's the first step in the process. And what we learned is serving the under-resourced community and then the environment are 2 of the top areas that our team members identified. And so we try to gather that feedback and then talk to our employees about sort of what they care about in their local communities as part of our social program process. During the pandemic, as I'll talk about a little bit later, obviously we had a lot of things that we scheduled that got canceled because of government restrictions and so on. But still, even during the pandemic in 2020, 60% of our employees participated in at least one event, which we thought was great. And we're going to try to continue to raise that percentage as we go forward. Senior management participation and enthusiasm is a big part of it as well. And then one thing that we're sort of experimenting with, and I think we need to, be careful with this, how we do this. But what we're doing also is, everybody in our company has KPIs. Being active in CSR is a sort of extra credit. It's not a requirement. It's not an obligation. But if you do it, we think that's great. Next slide. So we also talk to our bankers, our equity and debt investors, and including about CSR. And we also survey these stakeholders to find out what's important to them. We're fortunate in that we are rated highly overall by our investors on our approach to CSR, and I think the investors, sort of like the theme that we talk about community involvement. Also, they are vocal, and they like to see not only just giving money, which is important, but it's not the only thing. The fact that we do volunteering and that we try to add value that's within sort of our wheelhouse. And a good example of this is, during Airlink's Operation Airlift India, obviously, we gave money. Our individual employees also donated. but we also tried to make use of our industry contacts to add value. I know when we got the first calls from our friends at Airlink, we were on the phone to our customers in India over the weekend. I think we got a call on a Friday, and by Sunday night we had engagement from senior level executives at 3 different airlines in India that were interested in connecting with Airlink to see how they could help. So we want to bring not only the cash, but also where we can add value in a specific way that's part of our business. Maybe the next slide, Lizzie. One thing that we do is we are, very intentional about establishing a calendar at the beginning of the year, and we bring together, input from our colleagues across the globe and try to set up a calendar so that we are very organized about our CSR activities. And it's quite easy to get very busy and to sort of focus on the business, and that's important, obviously. But if we get things on the calendar and we are communicating well with each other internally, I think that really helps our effort. And as I mentioned, in my opening remarks, I think a part of what we try to do is combine long-term relationships with sort of nimble and more topical approaches. For instance, in the I guess the second quarter of 2020, when lockdowns were sort of part of what we were all dealing with, we realized in Singapore that meant online learning for students in Singapore, which went on for quite a long time. And some of the under-resourced communities, one of the challenges they faced is some of the kids did not have IT equipment that they could use to access their online learning. And so our team came together and said, hey, look, let's take our mobile phones, which we're constantly replacing, and let's donate those to organizations in Singapore that can use that to help those under-resourced kids connect with their classrooms. And so, again, that's not something that we would have thought of pre-pandemic, but it was something that came up kind of through the grassroots of our organization. And that's been something that we've been doing since 2020, and we're going to continue to do it, actually. Even, when we are breaking free from the pandemic and kids are back in school, they could still use those phones for online learning. So that's something that we'll continue to do. And again, we set up a calendar in 2020. What we learned is we had to be nimble as well because of government restrictions, and things got canceled or put off. And we did some things online where we could, or we converted something that might have been a food packing, effort into a let's just do fundraising. But we were able to do that. But we set our calendar early in the year, and then we give our employees lots of opportunities to participate. Next slide, Lizzie. And then so this is just sort of back to that theme of long-term commitments. We've had a commitment or a relationship, I should say, with Airlink for quite some time. And I know I'm preaching to the converted here on this call, but I think this is something that's really core to our business, is to develop that sort of relationship and to stick with it. And it's something where, again, if we combine it with more community-based, local-based CSR activities, this is something that becomes part of our corporate identity. This is just something we do. And when we go out to our employees and say, hey, Airlink has a new effort that they're doing to support COVID in India, or there's been a hurricane or an earthquake, we don't have to explain it internally. The employee base just says, hey, that's Airlink. I know what they do. I'm in. How can I help? And I think this is really important as part of our overall effort. And then maybe we'll go to slide 10. Yeah, and again, this is part of the local efforts. There's mobile phones, which I mentioned before. And then one of the things we did in Singapore, on the right-hand side, you can see some of us out there picking up trash. I mentioned having a senior level buy-in and enthusiasm is a big part of it for us. If you look at the sort of the middle photo on the right-hand side, there's a fellow with a trash bag. That's our CEO. He's cleaning up the waterways in Singapore. So I think, it's part of the identity of our company that we all pitch in, and I think that's a big part of it too. Next slide, Lizzie. And again, back to the theme of global approach. Each office has a CSR coordinator, and so that there's a grassroots feedback from that local office as to what's important to them in their community. One of my colleagues from Dublin is on the call, Andrea, and she's a couple pictures of her painting there. And so, again, we want the employees in the local offices to drive what we do in their local community. And I think that's been an important part of what's been successful in our company. And then maybe the next slide, Lizzie. Here's our London team. And then finally, slide 13. And so the pandemic really gave us some new challenges to deal with. I know it's the CSR wasn't the only thing that was challenging in 2020. But what we wanted to do is not only continue our efforts, but actually what we saw, and I know probably you saw it as well, there was an increased need in the local community, and we wanted to step things up, and that's what we tried to do. Obviously, the in-person participation, which we actually find, in a way, the most valuable in terms of our employee engagement and just the feeling of community among our team. That was sort of put on the back burner, and we had a few things that were canceled. But we did try to increase our donation levels. We tried to continue the engagement, even if sometimes it was online. And I think as we emerge from the pandemic, we're going to continue that effort. And I think with that, I'll hand it back to Lars. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. And something really or a couple of things resonated from your presentation just now. You said something along the lines of not only bring cash, but add value with our industry expertise. So that's certainly very, very true, and certainly one of the reasons why we started this series. And certainly the senior management involvement that you showed there with your CEO, cleaning up trash or cleaning the waterways always helps, because it really shows, not only talk about it, but certainly, walk the talk, so to speak. So thank you very much for that. So again, I just want to say a big thanks to all of our speakers today. And now we open the floor to comments, questions, anything else that anybody would like to share related to either this topic or anything that might be on your mind.
I have a question, if that's okay. I'll direct this one to Suzi, if that's all right with you, Suzi. I know you said that you haven't got this all figured out, but I'm just wondering, either now or at some point in the future, if you're going to bring in ESG requirements when it comes to doing things like a tender for suppliers, or, so that you're pushing it out to a wider community from your business, and particularly for those relationships where you have more, I suppose, say in what it is that you're going to select at the end of the day. Have you thought about how those sorts of requirements, might be, I suppose, posed in respect of ESG?
So I think if I'm getting the kind of basis of the question here, outside, so the requirements that we are working upon right now are the frameworks behind TCFD and SASB. That's the two frameworks that we're looking at. But we definitely are trying to figure out what are the supplements to that better tell the kind of S story, that social story, and the social story that is things like we had all talked about, you know, our disaster response, our supply chain efforts, all of those pieces, because I do feel like that is valuable to the investor community, but it's valuable to all those other stakeholders. So it really is just trying to figure out how we have those those report outs coexist, and without any standards behind kind of the social element of it, we are just kind of, you know, figuring it out, understanding what is material and what is it that our employees, our corporate clients are interested in hearing about, and finding a way to deliver it to them. And there's not going to be, I think this is the big kind of headline here for me, there is not one report that's going to do it for everybody. So we're going to have to get really creative in figuring out. A typical CSR report may have some of these ESG frameworks built into it, but there's probably going to be another document that is specific for, you know, the business, the supplier diversity population, or our vendor partners. There's going to be, you know, reporting criteria that are very unique to our corporate clients, reporting criteria, or, you know, topics that are really important to our employees. And I don't think they're all going to take the same format. I think they may coexist, maybe in one centralized, you know, repository, but I don't think they're going to look the same for all of them. I don't know if that helps. Like I said,
I was sort of formulating the question as everything went through and trying to concentrate on all the presentations. So apologies, it was a little bit mismatched.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the floor?
Well, actually, I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind, Lars. Thank you to all of our speakers. Those are really interesting presentations. I'd also, as a member of the Airlink team, like to thank you for all of the support that you and your teams give to Airlink throughout the year. As some of you will know, we helped 5.5 million people last year. We could only do that because of, well, because of the people on this call, basically. I know everybody chips in and helps us to do what we do. So thank you. Going back to a point that that Suzi made, how far is it possible for the industry to set its own criteria, as opposed to sort of, and referring back to Suzi's chart on the ecology of ESG criteria, who's setting the standards? How far is it possible for the industry to set its own standards and not just wait for something to come down the pipe, which could be very imperfect, given what all of these presentations have shown, which is in fact an industry that is full of companies doing really good social work, which could all be completely ignored, which could have unfortunate, unhappy consequences if companies feel that they just can't sustain this involvement because the market's looking elsewhere. I don't know who wants to take that on, David, Suzi. Perhaps each of our speakers have some thoughts, or even somebody from the room.
Kind of a point of view on it. I think with most things, those that have the money have the influence. So it's not surprising to me that we're starting with the investor community and really lining up with what the investor community is finding material. I think for the airline industry to come together to come up with their own standards, I don't think it's an impossible task. It needs to be rooted in where's the value in it. So I think we first need to make the line and the connection between the work that we're doing and the impact to the bottom line. Like, what does that mean for the bottom line? I think that is where we have to go with it. And it's not an easy task to complete by any way, shape, or form. But until that there is that connection to, and I think right now it really is focused on the money. All the other things are nice to haves, but if it really is about the investors right now and they're driving the standards, I think we have the best shot at connecting it to the bottom line. That's my point of view. I think otherwise we can do it, but it's going to take years, if not decades, to elevate that and get some attention behind it. That's my point of view.
Yeah, I think, but to add to that, I mean, my viewpoint would be that I think we all have to recognize that there is no one set of rules, no one set of standards today, that is generally accepted. And then second piece, similar to what, Suzi said is that, investors are only, yes, they are the guys, so to speak, with the money. But obviously, we are not all publicly traded companies. And so there's not always an investor behind it, number one. Number two, and as I mentioned at the very beginning, there are other stakeholders to which it is very important. There's not only, we were talking earlier about the suppliers, they're the customers, and they're the people that work for, for us, for the company, to which some of this is really, really important because they want to work for a company that does good, so to speak, right? So there's going to be different set of rules for different stakeholders, going forward, and it's really difficult and challenging, I think, to bring them all under one roof, because everybody has a little bit of a different criteria and certainly a different interest in making that happen.
I would add that, outside of just looking at the monetary value, actually measuring the ultimate impact itself is also really hard. So that's like another component that it's difficult when you're dealing with different stakeholders. So we try to measure our activity and, how much funding have we provided, how many shipments have we moved, pounds delivered, ultimately people touched by shipments. But it's still really kind of hard to measure, and it's hard to put value on that impact. Long-term recovery programs can be measured differently than critical disaster aid, for example. And even when we use our fund and we have different nonprofits that are involved, it's hard to have a really straight-laced requirements for those nonprofits and what they report back. So people do things a bit differently, which I think kind of makes it a little more difficult to have standards. But I mean, really great points by Suzi. I think kind of the investors still have the most weight. We look at kind of, how do our programs help our commercial clients? How do we help win more of those? That's definitely an impact and a factor that people want to see.
If I could just also add, I think we also face different regulatory environments. When I was looking at Suzi's logo soup and then that eye chart slide, hey, I really sympathize, because it is hard to know sort of what's coming next from a regulatory perspective. We're listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. We've got stock exchange listing rules that are Hong Kong based. We obviously have investors in the US, and so they come from that SEC mindset. And we have rating agencies, there are proxy advisors. Everybody's got their own sort of take on this. And I think, Andrew's question is a really, really good one. And if there were a way that we could come up with a common understanding of how, even though our businesses are so different, if there's a way for us to measure, ourselves and report on a common basis, that would be a huge value add, because right now it feels like, every year we get a new, sort of perspective from a different angle, and it's hard to know, kind of how to react to that. But one of the organizations that we're part of is called the Aviation Working Group. And it's an organization that is made up of the financing side of our industry. So there are banks, and there are leasing companies, and also the not just the financing but the manufacturing side. The OEMs are part of it. And we're trying to wrestle with this issue right now, is even from our sort of angle, from our perspective, the businesses are so different, but can we come up with some sort of a common understanding so that we could then, propose that to the investor community possibly? I mean, it's a work in progress, and we don't have the answer right now, but boy, that would be a huge value add for all of us, I think, if we could at least have a common basis to measure and report.
Yes, certainly very, very interesting, and difficult to bring all of these different items together, I think. I think we have time for, as we're approaching the hour here, we have time for maybe one more question. Anybody? Potentially, before we call it to a close.
Sorry, Lars, me again. In this presentation, and in fact in all three, it's quite clear that staff involvement is a critical component. A lot is on the weight of the shoulders of staff, because if there's any kind of voluntary element, you're asking them to do it. So perhaps all three of our speakers could explain how they went about getting staff involvement. I mean, if you did, I mean, is it top down? Did you go bottom up? Did we do staff surveys? Particularly interesting for organizations that have staffs in multiple countries, and likely as not have different cultural drivers and expectations and ways of thinking about things, which all have to be taken into account at the same time. I don't know who wants to go first. We'll do it alphabetical to be fair. David, do you want to try that? David,
yeah,
you want to try that first?
Yeah, great question, Andrew. Especially when you do have a global workforce and there are different cultures and different things to consider. So we try to have kind of a hybrid approach. There's some things top down. We're giving different opportunities and different programs and trying to keep everyone aligned and cohesive around kind of set goals. But we also like to have different organizations in different regions do their own thing and come up with their own ideas. So we have an internal volunteering program where we set some guidelines. We try to offer some opportunities centrally, but we have regional leads and office leads throughout all of our offices globally. And they do their own initiatives, decide locally what's the most important initiative they want to get back to, where do they want to donate, where do they want to volunteer. So you can see lots of different themes and different involvement from different groups. Then we try to bring people in through our kind of centralized .org programs. So last year, during kind of the peak of the PPE craze, there was a lot that needed to be done. So our kind of dedicated .org team brought in a lot of folks from across the company and really got lots of different people involved, trying to leverage their skill sets. So on one hand, we're tying it to the business to see what's the business need, where do we need support from other employees, but also determining what do people want to do, where can they learn and gain new skills and add value and give back in programs that they want to really contribute to. So we're going to keep working and expanding this a bit more and get more feedback, but it's kind of a mix of top-down approach, but also really grassroots. And frankly, that's how .org formed in the first place. So we founded it from the bottom up. It was something that employees really felt there was an opportunity to get involved in, brought it up to leadership, started doing it on our own, and then became a full-fledged program.
I will say our approach is very similar. We refer to it as our spectrum of engagement. So it's kind of a get in where you fit in type of approach. Everything from our dollars for doers equivalent that says, hey, if you're interested in something that you're doing in your own community, go out and do it and we'll reward you. All the way on the other end to saying United is squarely aligned with this, and it's an organization that we have a sponsorship. There's opportunities for you to get involved and kind of everything in between. So we have created kind of the spectrum of engagement for employees to be recognized and rewarded from top down and kind of bottom up grassroots. I'll also say that we are not perfect yet, but really embracing this culture of individual ideas to kind of rise to the top. Example that I gave of the Houston Food Bank when we opened the satellite kind of distribution facility at our hangar at the Houston airport. That was an idea of one of our employees and said, hey, we have space, they need space, can we make this happen? And we worked with them to make it happen. So, we just keep that open kind of door and inbox and really listen to what the local employees are asking of us to do and try and make it happen. So similar approach to what you were saying, David, of just providing kind of this spectrum of ways to get engaged.
I'd say our journey is very similar to what David and Suzi have just described. I think if you rewind to maybe 10 years ago, it was really much more of a top-down approach, and what we've been moving more toward is a grassroots approach. It's both more creative, more innovative, and I think it's more rewarding for the people who are involved. One of the things that we have done, in addition to surveys and town halls and things like that, but one of the things that we've done is, in recent years, we formed a ESG committee that's made up of employees from different parts of the business, so that we can be proselytizers to go out back into the business, both to gather feedback and information, but to also, make sure that everybody understands what we're trying to do as a committee and bring these threads together. And we really take it to heart that if we get feedback, we want to respond to it and honor it. And I think that just builds momentum and increases the engagement of the employee stakeholders. So it's been a journey. I think we're continuing along it, and hopefully continuing to build that sort of grassroots perspective.
Great, thank you very much. Well, it's 1:05 p.m. Eastern here, so I'd like to bring this session to a close. But before I do, just want to say again a big thank you to David Ashley from Flexport.com, Suzi Cabo of United Airlines, and obviously David Walton of BOC Aviation. As Andrew mentioned earlier, this is our last session for the summer holidays, but you will receive an email announcing the release of all of our 3 webinars, so you can watch them again, or for the ones that you have missed, watch them again. We ask you also that you please share them with your colleagues and let people know within the industry about our project, and potentially even people that want to get engaged and want to also participate or speak at these webinars. And again, we will return after the summer with more webinars on this topic. Based on your comments that we have received over the past 2 webinars and some of also of the last week's survey results, we are actually currently in the process of finding speakers representing the investor and financial sector to explain how investors and institutions are measuring and staking the social programs as they fit into the ESG framework. So that should be very, very interesting. And obviously, as soon as we have those speakers locked in, you will receive a notification for those sessions, as soon, again, as dates are confirmed. And finally, in the meantime, if there are aspects, on certain subjects you think we should look at these sessions in addition to what we have already done, or you think that there are speakers we need to connect with and invite to present, please do reach out to Andrew. That's Andrew Williams, who's the Airlink Director of Communication, right there, waving with a nautical theme there in the back, at awilliams@airlinkflight.org. So again, thank you very much. Until we return, really appreciate everybody's involvement, and stay safe. Thank you.